Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I want to go over an example of labor markets and the determinants of wages. And so what we want to do today is go through a mathematical example of how wages and income are determined based on how economists model labor markets. So what we're going to do is use my favorite example, which is going to be something relating to food, of course, and it's going to be looking at how employers decide how many workers to hire. We're going to use an example of a pizza place, and this is one of my favorite examples. It'll be really simple and straightforward. We'll graph it, and then we'll talk about some of the other determinants of income and wages and how they can play in. All right, so let's get started. So first of all, what we have here is we're going to be talking about a pizza place. And we want to remember when we're talking about labor markets, we're holding other inputs constant. So remember, when we think about production and producing goods, there's more than one kind of input, right? There's fixed inputs and variable inputs. The inputs are going to be things like capital, equipment, office space, that kind of stuff. Variable inputs are going to be things more like labor and materials. And usually we're going to think about variable inputs being things we can change at any time, whereas fixed inputs you have to wait to the long run to change. And so when we're talking about labor markets, we're going to be looking at the idea of inputs that we can change on a day-to-day basis, but we're going to be holding everything else constant. And that's important for this idea of diminishing marginal productivity. So the idea is if we only have, in my pizza example, we only have one pizza oven, one pizza shop, maybe we only have a set number of pieces of equipment, that means that we could add more and more workers to that capital, to that oven and that equipment, but we're going to start to get a little bit of a congestion problem where each additional worker is not going to be as productive as the first worker because we're holding that capital, those fixed inputs constant. So that's important to understand as we work through the example. So here we go. We have the quantity of pizzas produced, the quantity of labor we're going to hire, and then we're going to calculate the marginal product of labor, how much each worker produces as we add additional workers, and then the value marginal product of labor. And what you want to remember is that that value marginal product of labor is going to be the marginal product of labor times the price of the output, in this case, the price of pizza. So let's fill our chart in. So we're going to start out with 0 workers, and 0 workers will produce 0 pizzas, so we'll have no marginal product and no value. So far, so good? The next worker we hire is our first worker, and they're going to give us 4 pizzas. The second worker we hire is going to increase our total productivity. We're going to be able to produce a total now of 7 pizzas. Then we'll hire a third worker who can help us produce 9 pizzas, a fourth worker who can help us produce 10 pizzas, and then that fifth worker is really going to be where those diminishing marginal productivities really stand out because we're still only going to be able to produce 10 pizzas. So now what we want to do is look at the marginal product of labor. And remember, marginal product of labor is how much the quantity changes when we change our quantity of labor. So we go from 0 to 1. So what is the change in our productivity? What is the marginal productivity that one additional worker creates? Well, that one additional worker takes us from 0 to 4. So the marginal product of that unit of labor, that first worker, is 4 pizzas. So far, so good? Hopefully. The next worker, we go from 1 to 2. How many pizzas do we get from that second worker? That's that marginal product. That second worker gets us an additional 3 pizzas, takes us from 4 to 7. So their marginal product of labor is going to be 3. Then the third worker takes us from 7 to 9. 8, 7, 8, 9, or 9 minus 7 gives us a marginal product of 2. And then that fourth worker is going to give us 1 more pizza. And then down here, when we go from 4 to 5, the value or the marginal product of labor in this case is actually 0. So this last worker isn't helping us increase our productivity at all. So hopefully we've been talking about marginal relationships and marginal product a lot. So hopefully that part is pretty straightforward. The next part's a little bit more confusing because now what we want to do is what we're going to eventually do is decide how many workers to hire. And we pay workers in wages, dollars usually, right? And so we want to turn this marginal productivity from being measured in pizzas to being measured in dollars. So to do that, we need to know how much each pizza costs. So we're going to say that there's a price of pizza, and the price of pizza is going to be $8, okay? So every pizza can be sold for $8. Now we can multiply the marginal product by the price to get the value marginal product, the value of the productivity of that first worker, that second worker, and so on. So far, so good? So that first worker produces 4 pizzas at a price of $8 each. So our value marginal product of labor for that first worker is 4 times 8. 4 times 8 is 32. The second worker produces 3 pizzas times $8 each is going to give us a value marginal product of $24. The third worker produces 2 marginal pizzas, which we can sell for $8 each, so they can produce a value marginal product of labor of $16. The fourth worker, 1 pizza, that's $8. And then the fifth worker, no pizzas, no additional pizzas. That's a value marginal product of labor of $0. So far, so good? So this gives you a sense of what we're going to be talking about, because what we're going to be looking at is how firms decide how many workers to hire. And the big idea here is that firms will hire labor based on the wage that they have to be paid and their value marginal product of labor. So let me show you by, there we go, graphing that value marginal product of labor curve. So here we go. Let us see, yeah, that's pretty good. So there's our quantity of labor, and this is going to be our dollars, which is going to be measured in a couple of different things. And we are looking at now the market for pizza making labor or pizza makers. And we want to be comparing those workers, right? The first, second, third, fourth, and fifth workers, because we're looking at our quantity of labor, to our values, right? $10, $20, $30, $40, and I'll even go up to $50. Who knows? So now we can look at and graph the value marginal product of labor curve. So if you remember from the chart I was just showing you, the first worker is going to give us a value marginal product of labor of $32. I'm going to put that right here. Let's say that's right here. The second worker gives us a value marginal product of labor of $24. The third is going to be 16. The fourth is going to be 8. And the fifth is going to be 0. So this is our value marginal product of labor curve. So far, so good? That's kind of small. Let me see if I can get a little closer. Pardon me. There we go. That's a little better. Cool. So what do we use this for? We use this to determine how many workers we want to hire. To know how many workers we want to hire, we need to know what the wage is. So we're going to say our wage is $16. Okay? So we'll say our wage is $16. I'm going to put that right here. And we can graph it too. we can go ahead and just graph it. It's going to be a straight line because what we're going to assume in this model is that everyone gets the same wage in this market. So all pizza makers are equally efficient, so they all earn that $16. So it's going to be like right there. That'll be our wage line. And so now we can do what a business owner or a hiring manager would do, which is we can determine who we're going to hire. And so basically what we do, the way we think about this is we think about comparing the value marginal product of labor of the worker to their wage. So this first worker earns us as a company $32 by making those 4 pizzas. And we only have to pay them $16. So would you hire that first worker? Yeah, you pay him $16 and you get all this extra money, right? This additional income back, right? You get an extra $24. What about the second worker? The second worker is not as productive as the first worker, right? The value marginal product of labor is falling. And so would you still hire that second worker though? Yeah, their value marginal product of labor is $24, which is still greater than their wage, still worth it. What about the third worker? Generally, we consider the third worker to be our equilibrium. That's where we would stop hiring. We would hire that third worker, but we wouldn't hire the fourth worker. Even though the fourth worker does make a pizza and does make us money, they only make us $8 and we have to pay them $16. And so this difference here says, hey, don't hire that worker. It's going to cost money, not make you money. And so it's through this that we determine that the value marginal product of labor curve is actually our labor demand curve because it shows us the quantity of labor we demand as wages change. If there's an economic crisis and wages fall, maybe wages fall down to $8 or even then we would see a lower wage would mean we would hire more workers, right? If wages go up, we would hire fewer workers. And so that value marginal product of labor curve is 2 things. It is the demand for labor curve, and it's also how we can articulate and graphically display how valuable each worker is based on the price of the good they produce and their productivity. So what happens if we change things? What happens if we say the price of pizza goes up? If we have an increase in the price of pizza, you see that there? We can see the value marginal product of labor curve shift out. Maybe now pizzas are worth $12. So if the first worker can produce 4 pizzas at $12 each, that's going to mean that that worker is now worth $48. And the second worker can produce 3 pizzas at $12 each. They're going to be able to be productive $36 worth of productivity. The second worker is going to be able to be productive and produce $24 of productivity. The third worker can produce 1 pizza at $12. The fourth worker can produce 1 pizza at $12, so we'll put them down here maybe. And then the fifth worker still produces 0, and so their productivity is still 0. Cool? So that would shift the value marginal product of labor curve out. Does that make sense? So that's the basic idea here of this model, is that value marginal product of labor gives us a way to determine the value of the productivity of our workers. And we can do other things with the labor market too. So we can go ahead and start back over from scratch and put our quantity of labor in and our wages here and impose our, let's see, do it this way. That's better. Value marginal product of labor curve, which is our labor demand curve. And we also have our labor supply curve. Our labor supply is given by a lot of things. It's given by attitudes towards leisure. It's given by our opportunity cost of other options. And it's also given by our population and our immigration. And so we're going to see our labor supply curve be upward sloping because as wages go up, we're going to be more willing and able to enter the marketplace and do work. And so when we compare these two and we see, okay, who's willing? Some people are willing to work for a very low wage. Some people only want a really high wage. Some firms are willing to hire some workers, but each worker is a little bit less productive. That's going to give us our equilibrium quantity of labor and our equilibrium wage. Cool? So we can see things that shift the labor demand curve. Labor demand curve is going to shift by anything that affects the productivity of workers, like technology and new advancements, new equipment, new capital. It's also going to be shifted by changes in the price of the good. Labor supply curve could be shifted by immigration, could be shifted by changing opportunities in other labor markets, and other factors like that. Okay, does that make sense? Hopefully it makes sense. Okay, so we can see things shift those curves. The other thing we can think about that we talked about that we might have talked about in the chapter is other factors that can raise wages. There's actually a ton of things that can alter and distort wages. Minimum wage laws, something called, there are efficiency wages where you pay workers more to get better workers or more efficient workers. The other thing we can see is unions can tend to raise wages, right, through collective bargaining. And then we can also talk about monopsony employers. And a monopsony is an individual buyer instead of an individual seller. And so that's a single firm hiring workers, or a single firm demanding labor. And that is going to take this supply curve and create an additional marginal cost of hiring curve. That's going to give us a different equilibrium quantity of labor, less labor. And we're going to see lower wages, because those monopsony firms can negotiate lower wages, much in the same way that a union negotiates higher wages, or a minimum wage law might tend to have higher wages, or we might see higher wages because of differential labor market factors, and because of efficiency wages. And so the more you dig into labor markets, the more there is to know, but these are the sort of the basic ideas, okay? So let me know what questions you have, what other examples you'd like to see, and I will see you all next time. Thanks so much.